All right, so the wonderful mystic and philosophical Spencer Oliver gave a talk the other day, and there's a news article here that apparently Spencer Oliver is questioning Teofimo Lopez's mental resilience. And as much as I don't agree with Spencer Oliver in a lot of things, in a lot of ways, I think he's, not the sharpest, and also, I just don't agree with a lot of things he says. I think he's a bit of a company man at this point. It's a good point to bring up, right? Because I followed Tiafimo. I think it started following him around the time when he fought Lutsenko, and I went back and watched his fights, and I was like, this guy is exciting, right? And the fight against Lutsenko is a great one because it is really just it shows the levels of Lutsenko and Tiafimo in that fight, right? But after that, Tio's had a bit of a up and down and somewhat boring career. Like the power isn't there as much as it used to be. He lost against Cambosos, who, really you think Cambosos wouldn't even tie his jockstrap at that point, right? But still, he lost. And, Sandor Martin was the other fight. I think that was in 2022 when, he was getting kind of outclassed. I still think he won the fight, but it just didn't look good. And after that fight, that's when the famous words came from Tiafimo saying, "Have I still got it?" And that was, back in 2022. Since then, he's mustered up some wins. The Josh Taylor win, people really rave about, but, I personally think at that point, Josh Taylor had become shot to bits, right? With Josh Taylor, I think the fights, the sparring, the alcohol, because that's something that people are quite well aware of. I think just his life outside the gym just caught up with him in the end. And I think the last two fights of Josh Taylor were the last in the engine. I personally scored that fight, and I just don't think Teofimo was extremely impressive. He was just in there with a shot fighter. That's why he looked more impressive. But that was one of the few fights I've seen Teo look really happy. Then you've got I've forgotten the guy's name. What's his name now? Hang on, let me look at his box rec. Barboza Jr., right? And in that fight, I actually thought, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Barboza, I thought he might actually beat Teo because of Teo's lack of enthusiasm and the lack of heart and maybe even mental resilience he was having around this time period. And also Barboza can box. But Teo came in and, wasn't an exciting fight, but on that card it probably was the most exciting fight of all night. So, it was just a boxing match. It wasn't like Haney running around, it wasn't like Garcia shelling up, right? But it's a fair thing to question because in the Shakur fight, you saw the demons come back, right? That Shakur completely outclassed him. And, my two things about Teo is yes, he's lacking confidence, but my biggest thing I think that causes this mental block and almost like his inner child coming out sometimes when he relies too much on his dad. And I'm sorry to say it, but I think his dad's a fucking idiot. Like I've seen him in the corner and like that's not corner work. Telling your son, no, where's your fucking power and why, just go out there and knock him out. I could tell him to do that. The bloke in Weatherspoons next to me could fucking tell him to do that. Like that's not instructions. Instructions from the corner. If you want to be extreme like Teddy Atlas, you can say things like, what are you bloody doing? Like Teddy Atlas is a famous one when he tried to take Michael Moore's gloves off and tell him he'll get in and fight, right? But, or you got like Ben Davison trying to give out strategies, right? But I think Teo's biggest problem is his dad. Now, some boxers work well with their dads. Joe Karzagi being one of the main ones. I actually think Sean Porter and his dad had a really good relationship. And then there's some dads that won't work. Like I can imagine Ryan Garcia's dad in his corner. John Fury being in Tyson Fury's corner was a terrible idea. Um, with Tiafimo, I just think he needs to move away from his dad. Maybe at this point he just doesn't want to, but I think it's his dad that causes this lack of mental resilience. Maybe there's some things there, but I think Tio, when he's happy and he's confident and he's fighting non-movers, I would say, is when he shines because all of his bad fights are usually when he's fighting movers. I'm going to give my analysis on the Rolly Romero fight, but I don't think we're going to see a bad mental version of Teofimo because Rolly is extremely limited and really, in my opinion, just has a bit of power. But, it's not exactly like Teo, because Teofimo's come up from lightweight, but so was Rolly. They're both about the same size. So I think Teo will win this, and I think he'll win it by knockout. But I do understand Spencer Oliver's points because I feel the exact same way. But my opinion, I don't think it's necessarily his confidence in what he believes about himself. I think it's just his environment. So my opinion is move away from the father. I think that is something he needs to do sooner rather than later. But he's still got time. He's still young enough. He can still move to another trainer. But anyway, that's my thoughts. Let me know what you think below. Do you think Spence Oliver's got a point for once? And do you think Teofimo should move away from his dad? Peace.